All right, so I actually got a little bit of good news here for you guys coming out of the FTC. That's the Federal Trade Commission, where the chair, this woman named Lena Khan, is deciding to make some pretty decent moves in the right direction in terms of actually freeing up what many capitalists refer to as the free labor market, which in many instances, as we're about to discuss here, is absolutely not free in any way, shape, or form. So basically, this is having to do with what are called non-compete agreements or contracts, where basically workers are prevented from leaving the job that they currently hold to go work for a different company that might be a potential competitor. Now, it's not even just about the idea that you would move jobs in order to get a higher paycheck or better benefits or better working conditions at some other company, but it's also just having the ability to have that threat sort of in your back pocket, so that if you're going to negotiate those things with your current employer, you do have that added bit of leverage. So there are multiple different reasons why this is actually important, not just for workers who happen to be under non-compete agreements or contracts, but also just the broader workforce in general, where this is something that could have broad implications for the entirety of the American workforce across the board. So here from the New York Times, they say U.S. moves to bar non-compete agreements in labor contracts. Okay, so what are they talking about here? They say, in a far-reaching move that could raise wages and increase competition among businesses, the Federal Trade Commission on Thursday unveiled a rule that would block companies from limiting their employees' ability to work for a rival. And just think about this for a second. I mean, how much we talk about, conservative narratives where they'll just be like, oh, well, if you don't like, your shitty minimum wage job, then just go work somewhere else, right? You can leave. You can always get up and get rid of that job and go find some better one if that's what you want to do, right? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We hear this all the time, and yet there's things like this that are sort of like hiding beneath the surface, which is like completely, the antithesis to what even a capitalist would argue in this type of a situation, where in, I guess, their theoretical framework, you would have a, free labor market, and you would also have a, free market in the sense of like freeing capital to do whatever they want to do within the market. And, it's just the complete opposite of what even that theoretical or economic framework would dictate, right? So there's, multiple different arguments you could have about this, either from a socialist perspective or even from a pro-capitalist perspective, that would, give you the indication that these non-compete agreements are just completely fucking ridiculous and are nothing but, giving these corporations, these billionaires, even more of an ability to put a stranglehold on the workers that work under them, and that obviously generate the vast majority of the revenue and the profits for these companies that make them so wealthy. But they continue here with a little bit more information, saying the proposed rule would ban provisions of labor contracts known as non-compete agreements, which prevent workers from leaving for a competitor, or, and this is also kind of important, starting a competing business for months or years after their employment. I mean, think about that. You sign up, you go, you get a job, you do an interview, whatever, you take this position, and suddenly you find yourself in a contract where not only can you not leave the company to go work for a competitor, but in addition to that, you can't even, if you have some, grand entrepreneurial idea, or you want to go start a business in a similar field, you can't even leave to go start your own business. I mean, it's just, again, even under like a capitalist framework of how our systems and how our economic situations should be structured, right? This makes absolutely no sense. And they say that it also often within certain geographical regions can be restricted, right? So they point out that there have been agreements that have applied to workers as varied as sandwich makers, hairstylists, doctors, or software engineers. Now, I mean, maybe you could make an argument like with a software engineer, right? That like, okay, well, if I'm hiring this person, they design a bunch of our, exclusive, algorithms or stuff behind the scenes. I don't want them to just go get a job at some other tech company and then giving them that same proprietary information or technology or something like that. You could make a stretch of an argument surrounding that issue, but that's something that could easily be just as covered as, something under like a non-disclosure agreement or an NDA or something like that, right? So not exactly much pushback that you could have for this type of a thing being banned from existence or wiped off the face of the planet. But, again, they point out here that like this is applied to everybody from like software engineers to like sandwich makers. I mean, there was one story that came came out a couple of years ago, where this was something that even like Jimmy John's sandwiches had in place, where it's just like, I guess, I don't know, you have so much like secret proprietary information that you don't want somebody who's making sandwiches at Jimmy John's to go work at a different Jimmy John's up the road, or to go work for like a Subway or something like that, a Firehouse Subs, maybe one of these other sandwich companies. I mean, it's just like completely egregious, obviously over restrictive, but this is one of the things that is really like anti-theoretical capitalism, but is something which many of the largest corporations and billionaires deploy as they attempt to monopolize a lot of these industries and restrict the ability for some of their competition within these various sectors from actually hiring people and from being able to get an entrance into these competitive industries. But I mean, again, it's just a brazen contradiction there between what they would say that they're in favor of versus what they actually do in practice here. I mean, restricting sandwich makers from being able to go and get a job at another sandwich shop or something like that. I mean, it's completely laughable at face value, but they also point out some of the important statistics surrounding this issue. So they say that studies show that non-compete agreements, which appear to directly affect roughly 20% to 45% of U.S. workers. I mean, that's a pretty broad range of an estimate there, right? 20% to 45%. So it could be anywhere as low as 1/5 of workers, or anywhere as close to as high as like half of workers that are potentially affected by these agreements in the United States in the private sector. And they also say that they hold down pay because job switching is one of the more reliable ways to secure a raise. Okay, so again, exactly what I was talking about at the top of this video, but they say that many economists also believe that they help explain why pay for middle income workers has stagnated in recent decades. So this may be just like one tiny factor within a long list of factors, right? I've shown you guys the graph showing in the neoliberal capitalist era since roughly like the Reagan or Nixon administrations, where productivity has been completely detached from wage growth, and how wages have been largely stagnant and barely keeping up with inflation over the last number of decades. And this may be some factor in that. I think also a lot of factors would be like, the further consolidation of different industries, the monopolization of a lot of our major key industries in this country, as well as just like, deregulation and privatization of different things. And so I think that there's a lot of different reasons why we've gotten to the position economically that we are in right now, and that have played a role in this. But certainly, something like non-compete agreements would just be like the cherry on top in terms of how you end up constructing an economy where literally less than a handful of corporate ghouls have more wealth than the bottom like half of the American people. So, I mean, again, this is something that could have a significant degree of impact, especially if they're considering that it's anywhere between like 1/5 to 1/2 of the American people that could be directly impacted by that. Now, again, the argument that they're making is that it's not just those specific workers who have non-compete agreements, it's the entire workforce. I mean, it's the same exact concept of how having more unions within an economy actually lifts the floor for all workers across the board, not just those workers who happen to be in a union, because it puts pressure on a lot of these employers in order to actually follow through on providing better benefits, better wages, better working conditions for their workers, because they fear the prospects of unionization. So in the same way, something like getting rid of these non-compete agreements, whether it's for 20% of the workforce or half of the workforce or close to half of the workforce or something like that, that will have trickle-down effects to literally every American worker in the entire country. But they continue here saying that other studies show that non-competes protect established companies from startups, reducing competition within industries. The arrangements may also harm productivity by making it hard for companies to hire workers who best fit their needs. So again, this even comports to a capitalist understanding of our economy and the structure of how we have decided to go about doing shareholder capitalism. But they say that the FTC proposal is the latest in a series of aggressive and sometimes unorthodox moves to rein in the power of large companies under the agency's chair, Lina Khan. And this is one very specific area where I will give Biden credit, similar to the NLRB, although they still have massive gaps and massive problems that need to be addressed within these various agencies. The one thing that I will give mild credit to Biden on is that it does seem like he's put good people in these top positions within those various agencies. So, a little bit of credit there to Biden for putting somebody in this position who does somewhat good things. But they say that President Biden also hailed the proposal on Thursday, saying that non-compete clauses, quote, are designed to simply lower people's wages. based Biden there. He says these agreements block millions of retail workers, construction workers, and other working folks from taking a better job, getting better pay and benefits in the same field, he said at a cabinet meeting. And they also say that the public will be allowed to submit comments on the proposal for 60 days, at which point the agency will move to make it final. And an FTC document said that the rule would take effect 180 days after the final version is published. But experts say that, of course, it could face legal challenges. I'm sure, corporations are not going to be having this, especially if it affects such a large chunk of the American workforce. I mean, there are going to be, corporate, different agencies and think tanks and lobbyists who are lining up to try to tank this from happening and posing every single different variation of a legal challenge that they possibly can. So, stay tuned for that. It's obviously not just going to go through easily or anything like that, but still, it seems like this is a pretty ironclad policy proposal that they have going here. They finish off here saying the agency estimated, and this is kind of mind-blowing here, the agency estimated that the rule could increase wages by nearly $300 billion a year across the economy. $300 billion that American workers are being starved of because these corporations are allowed to basically entrap them within their various jobs. I mean, it's, a lot of money that we're talking about here. They say that Evan Starr, an economist at the University of Maryland who has studied non-competes, said that that was a plausible wage increase after the elimination. So again, credit to the FTC here, possibly getting a pay raise because of these types of actions, right? They say that Dr. Starr said that non-competes appear to lower wages for both workers directly covered by them and for other workers, partly by making the hiring process more costly for employers who must spend time figuring out whom they can hire and whom they can't. So, I mean, again, exactly what I was just saying. Not only does this apply pressure across the American economy to raise the wage floor for the American people across the board, but in addition to that, the point that they were just making there is that, you have employers or corporations who have multiple different choices. Either they could give you a raise, a mild raise, for your position to stay there, or if you have that leverage, if you have the ability to say, well, I have a job offer down the street that's going to pay me X amount, they have a decision to either raise your wage, which would be cheaper than the alternative, which would basically be having to let you go and then finding some other worker and training them and putting them in this position and setting all of that up, which is much more expensive for them at the end of the day. So that's exactly why they have been pushing so aggressively and will continue to push aggressively against getting rid of these non-compete clauses, because this is just a brazen attempt by the capitalist class in order to further constrain their stranglehold on the necks of the American working class.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying